Welcome back to The Whole Person Revolution, a podcast of Comet Magazine. I'm your host, Ann Snyder, and we've begun this fall exploring what it might require to rehumanize our society in an age that feels newly assaulted by a complex series of forces. Advances in biomedicine and AI, ideologies that essentialize, an instrumentalist culture more broadly that idolizes efficiency at the expense of presence and true relationship. More time we're all spending interacting with a screen than with a person. Social media and its many scaled-up distortions, reactive interpretations of historical change that wind up demonizing often whole people groups and cause us all to seem to just lurk backwards in moral time. And then, of course, the enduring sins of selfishness and hard-heartedness that we are each responsible for surrendering to perfect love, but that seem to see fewer and fewer trusted containers within which to meet that love. With me today to mourn some of this, but also share some of her call to puncture the distorting forces is Michelle Browder. An artist, an activist, community builder, and guide, Michelle welcomed me and a group of others to Montgomery, Alabama earlier this year as we wrapped up a 6-day historical pilgrimage through the American South. I have described the formative impact of that trip on me in a previous episode, but what Michelle gave me was a fresh model to understand the redemptive possibilities of staring some ugly truths in the face, and the various creative ways in which such confrontation can be done with an invitational spirit, grounded in grace and hope. We're going to get into the details of what that has looked like in her life here, but first off, Michelle, very, very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining the Whole Person Revolution.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
So, Michelle, you are an artist, an activist, and a guide who most recently created a monument in Montgomery memorializing 3 enslaved women whose bodies were tortured and used for experimentation by a Dr. J. Marion Sims, who was this Confederate doctor historically honored as the, quote, father of modern gynecology. You're doing some pretty deep, important, needed historical correction in a particularly heated but also hungry time. What is the enunciation moment for all this? How did your vocation come to be?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. This is going to be so much fun to be with you. But I have to go back to my childhood and where I came from. So I was born in Denver, Colorado, and my initial upbringing in my formative years was that of, a diverse community. I had my next door neighbor, Heather Dotson, a little red-haired girl with freckles, and my folks across the street, my neighbors, they were Vietnamese, Mr. and Mrs. Big Thong, and then up the street were the Hernandez family. So, on Fridays and Saturdays, every Friday and Saturday, there was a quinceañera somewhere. And then, so my community, my babysitter was this Black teenage girl from up the street. And so I had a very full life at a very early age. And then to move to Montgomery, or not even Montgomery, but Urbana, Alabama, which is like 45 minutes from Montgomery, Alabama, and then maybe an hour or 45 minutes from Birmingham, to then have to be transplanted into a space where there were, it's just white and Black. There were no other cultures, no other people. And it was just after integration, like maybe 10 years after integration or so, a little bit, maybe 15 years after that. And so it's, it was a hard transition. And so I found myself constantly, battling my teachers because the N-word was used all the time. I found myself, defending myself because I was tall even as a kid and had good diction. I started fighting, and my dad, who was the first Black prison chaplain that was appointed by George Wallace.
Whoa.
He came home one day and he had 8 tubes of paint and 10 t-shirts. This was my 3rd suspension. I'm a latchkey kid, so Oprah Winfrey was our babysitter.
Yes.
And so he says, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to fight with you. He said, I see what's going on with you. And he says, you're bored. He said the curriculum, my dad began to talk to me about the curriculum because I could ace a test without even looking at it. It just wasn't challenging. And then what I was going through in terms of, the bullying, he was like, if you don't get a grip on how you handle conflict, you will find yourself in Tutwiler prison. And I had been with him to Tutwiler. It was an all-women's prison, and they didn't treat these women like they were human. And so he said, get it together. He said, I'm going to leave you these 8 tubes of paint. You have 3 days. He said, do something creative with your life so that I don't have to visit you in prison. And so I started painting T-shirts and caps and shoes, and it was just really crazy. And from there, I started my own business, and I took those T-shirts and sold them at school. And later on, I went to the Art Institute of Atlanta, and that is where I really found my footing as an artist. That was the beginning journey to where I am today.
Wow. What a father who had the right words at the right moment.
Absolutely.
And I love how you defined full life. I think when a lot of people say that today, they mean it in terms of, I'm so busy, there's too much to do. But I love how you located that in people and sort of the cross-cultural block you had that you didn't probably think was unique. Probably you just thought it was normal. So you had that enunciation moment at the Art Institute. Did you automatically think that you were going to create as an artist for the sake of sort of social needs and cultural needs in the nation writ large?
Well, this latest project, The Mothers of Gynecology, I was actually introduced to Robert A. Tom, an illustrator that created 45 pieces of art. He was commissioned to create this art by Park Davis, which is now Pfizer. And it was to show early medicine. His, creative idea about J. Marion Sims is world renowned. Everyone knows that everyone around the country has seen this painting. And when I was 18, I was standing at my professor's desk, and he had a little postcard size print of this painting. And I asked my professor, whom was also a bully, very racist. And I asked him, I said, what is this? I've never seen this before. What does this mean? And he said, you go figure it out. And it was a painting of Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy on the table, and standing one on the table facing Dr. Sims, or what is known to be Dr. Sims, and 2 white doctors looking to, hold them down, and then 2 black women peering behind this white sheet. And it troubled me at 18, not knowing that this 17-year-old child on this table would haunt me for the rest of my days. And so, it was the jarring of my then professor telling me to go figure it out, and then later being told that I could not pass my portfolio because it was not white enough. Wow. I had too many black characters in my portfolio, so I dropped out of college. I'm a college dropout.
Real quick, was that said to you? Like it wasn't
Yes.
white enough? Oh my goodness.
Yes. He said you need to diversify because these 3 girls, right, later on, after I went and figured out who they were, I started creating ads for Tide and Pepsi. And I created this whole portfolio full of, it was for the Black Arts Festival, and it was for these 3 women. And so I had cups and mugs and T-shirts and tickets and, advertisement, and it was of these 3 girls. And he just, told me that it's not diversified enough. It's not white enough. You need to diversify your portfolio. And so that means I would have to stay another year and try to recreate the portfolio. But instead, I chose to leave.
Wow.
So it was at that moment in time, I could remember as if it was yesterday. I was like, I'm going to change this. I'm going to do something about this. I learned a lot from the Shrine of the Black Madonna. I went to learn more about my roots. In Alabama, they don't teach you real history. Most curriculums in most schools don't teach you the real history. So I went and, looked for myself. I went on a journey to see, who these women were, who I am as a Black person, as a Black woman, and which led me to the work that I'm doing today.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for sharing all that. Could you explain? I confess, when I came and saw your exhibit in Montgomery, I did not know who Marion Sims was. and I'm guessing I'm not alone. So could you
Sure.
describe who he was and then a little bit more the backdrop of these women?
Yeah, the long and short of it is that J. Marion Sims moved here in 1840, and he opened up a clinic, actually two hospitals, one in Mount Meigs, and then later on the one near his office, which was the Negro Clinic for Women, or Negro Women's Hospital. And he was, of course, a slave owner. He was also a doctor that, wanted to specialize in the area of gynecology and or trying to fix a hole, which is a vesical vaginal fistula that's caused during prolonged childbirth. And so he felt that he could do this. And he admitted that this is not a field that he was known to do, but he felt like he could experiment and find a way, a curability to cure this drastic condition that Black women. There was also a white woman that fell off the back of a horse and created a fistula, and he was able to operate on her as well. But that whole notion that Black people had higher tolerance for pain, that there was no need for anesthesia, is what he pretty much made his fittings on. But he went on to advertise that, and slave owners from around the county and the state began sending their chattel property, enslaved girls, women, children, men with lockjaw, drop foot, babies with platelets that needed some type of apparatus to keep to help formulate their platelets in their head. And so he started this experimentation on these individuals, these humans, and doing the research at our state's capital, there is a statue in his honor. When I moved back to Montgomery, Alabama, or when I moved to Montgomery, I wasn't here, but my family has an organization here. And I started, just researching. I want to know where I'm living, right? And so on our city seal, it says we're the cradle of the Confederacy. And the birthplace of the civil rights movement. I wanted to know what made someone put that on there.
Yeah.
And so the iconography around our city is that of J. Marion Sims, Jefferson Davis, and other slave owners. And so after doing the digging, I found that the ancestors had called me home to tackle this issue. When you think of experimentations, during COVID, everyone touted Tuskegee. There's so much more that America has done in terms of experimentations. You can talk radiation, you can talk about all of these experimentations that happened. But in Montgomery, Alabama, it was on the vaginal areas of Black women that the speculum was created by Sims. And so with that, the torture that went with that. So it was him moving to Montgomery. And in his memoir, Story of My Life, he talks about these experimentations with these women. So 1845, he opens a hospital, literally 5 blocks from where the mothers of gynecology are now, have been erected. And he kept upwards to 11 of these women, girls, in the backyard in a makeshift hospital, literally 4 blocks from the auction block in downtown Montgomery, Alabama. And one of his victims was experimented on over 30 times, or upwards to 30 times.
Oh my gosh.
Anesthesia. And she was a girl.
She was a girl, like very young. And I remember you saying simultaneously there had been breeding farms also happening, right?
Oh, yes. Not far from here, we have the West Scottsville plantation, which is where Anarcha was enslaved, literally 8 blocks in the opposite direction from the hospital. There were these, 1808, the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed. So from 1808 to the end of the Civil War, from 40,000 enslaved African men, women, and children to the end of the Civil War, their descendants, that's 52 years. Where are they getting them? We can't go back to these, Ghana and Benin, and we're not going back to Dahomey. We're not doing that. We are breeding enslaved, human trafficking people, right? In the United States, in Montgomery, Alabama. So, and Anarcha was one of those.
It's like Joseph Mengele. It's no different.
No different. And then the birth of eugenics that came from the South, right, in America as it is, and where Hitler got a lot of his revelations and his thought process to torture Jewish people. It's, yes.
It's deep. So, for our listeners, if you ever get a chance to go to Montgomery, even if you are not able to get sort of a personal tour from Michelle, this she's created like 3 beautiful, bold, striking, I'm going to call it a monument of these women. And can you say their names again?
Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy.
Lucy, Betsy, Anarcha.
Just 3 of 11 women.
3 of 11. So I highly recommend everyone to go and sort of meditate. And I want to get deeper a little bit into, even you were talking about sort of American iconography, and even your own research process when you were so troubled by this painting as an 18-year-old to discover the Black Madonna, and then so I want to get into that, but just at a more materials, sort of artistic craft level, can you describe what materials you used and the intention behind that as you created this monument and these, reincarnation of these women and their witness?
Sure. It's funny because I was already on this path to create this monument, right? But I was visiting San Francisco, and I have this Japanese family. My girlfriend is she's a Japanese, and her husband is Jewish. And so I talked to my Japanese family and was visiting them, and I met them on my tours. And they were like, if you're ever in San Francisco, come out and see us. I'm like, don't do that, because I'll do it. And so literally I was out visiting them, and they said, hey, let's go to breakfast. We're going to Hayes Valley. And so we go to Hayes Valley, and I turn this corner, and there was this magnificent 15-foot tall statue named Tara. I'm looking for the name at the bottom. I'm like, who did this? I stood there. I froze for like 10 minutes. And my friends was like, what's going on with you? And I'm like, Anarcha needs to be, and she was metal. She was bright and shiny and just beautiful, just really intricate with all of these various designs. And she was made out of metal. And so I'm telling them, so it sparked a conversation between the 3 of us to tell them about the monument that I've been thinking about since I was a kid. And so they were like, okay, so, 2 weeks go by, my Japanese family, they're at a Jewish Seder. And across from them was a woman who volunteered on that statue. And the woman asked them, well, where are you all from? And she said, Hayes Valley. And she says, oh, have you seen Tara? And they said, yeah. And she was like, I helped volunteer on that.
Oh, wow.
They immediately called me and during the Seder and was like, Michelle, we found someone that knows the artist. And by this time, I'm already in New York and doing other things with my sketches. And they said, Michelle, we just need to have a conversation with the artist. They found the artist. It took a year for her to say yes. But she said, come to San Francisco, send me your drawings. I'll secure the space. It's called the Box Shop. I'll secure it. I'm going to need you to hire 3 of us, but we're going to teach you how to weld.
Oh, my goodness.
We're going to help you bring your sculpture to life.
Oh, Michelle. And what a ground up thing for you to learn how to weld to do this.
Yes. And so I call her Teacher San, but her name is Dana Albany. She's a Burning Man artist. It was a privilege to work among such gifted, creative, awe-inspiring artists. And they all taught me. They volunteered. They were like, we don't have Burning Man this year. Can we volunteer? Can we help do something? Mm. And to learn from them was I was there for a month and 3 weeks learning from some of the best artists that the world has to offer.
Wow, what a grace and what timing too that this sort of got to happen into COVID and the time and the space set apart. Mm-hmm. This is a large question, and obviously you don't have to answer it comprehensively, but what is your sense right now for the future of what I am going to call American iconography? And I use that specifically, and this podcast is grounded in a deep appreciation for specifically what we call like 2,000 years of Christian social thought. And there's sort of a spiritual appreciation for, of course, the role of memory and memorialization, but also what it is to receive and stand in stillness before the Greek icons or Russian Orthodox or whatever, that there is something about an image that commemorates a person who existed in this world. There's something sacred about that if we take the time. And sometimes I feel like the American monuments debate has just gotten so politicized. It's like ignoring the deeper human realities of what it is to look at truth and what it is to look at a suffered story that has never gotten acknowledged. So with that backdrop, what is your hope and sense of the future of more pieces and exhibits of the sort you've created?
These images that we have now, I think Monument Lab has done this amazing study on monuments and why they must change, because I do believe it's 50% of them are to white men that oppressed Black people or that were warmongers. And 23% of them were that of warmongers, if you will. And so, yes, I think that we need to start changing the narrative, and we can do that through art. We can start either telling the truth about this nation. You know, when you think of indigenous people and how they've been marginalized and kept away from the true history of this turtle island, as North America is called in some folklore, I think that it would help us give a greater understanding as to who we are as a country, where we need to go. Because again, we have Washington, we have Jefferson Davis, we have, Jerry Marion Sims, we have Lincoln, and, but it's not about idolizing these people. It's about the calling that was on them at that particular time. And I'm speaking in reference to MLK, to have him at the National Memorial there in DC. It speaks volumes, but I just think that we can learn so much more. For what we've done here in Montgomery is to tell the rest of the story. We received a grant from the Monument Lab that helped us create a space for healing. You can come and leave a testimonial or your witness on the phone, and it will be uploaded to a shared cloud where people can go in and listen to these stories about how they overcame poor health care. Women are triggered by seeing, these statues, and then also the what they went through, learning about the torture that these girls suffered or endured. And then, prime example, I had a judge that came. We had this big event for Black women who are judges, and they came in their Black robes and they stood with the monument. It was so empowering. It's great. But one of them broke down and began to weep and said, "I'm 39 years old and I'm childless because I had fibroid tumors."
Oh, wow.
And that story, when she told that story, there was a round of just women begin to
weeping
because so many women suffer from fibroids. And for her, she's like, "I won't have a legacy," but I asked her to record it. Can we have that as a safe space for women to record their stories? And that's what Monument Lab came in to do. They gave us a grant where we now have a space in the back where you can sit, relate, and release and talk about these issues. Talk about how we can overcome by words of our witness and testimony, right? And so basically, yes, I think that if we had more monuments or more iconography around our country that speaks to healing and reckoning, I think that we will be better for it.
Yeah.
We will be better for it.
Yeah. It sounds like what's in your backyard now is like almost like a Jerusalem wall or something, the sort of people's ability to confess and deposit and surrender, but also just create a moment for others to hear. It's powerful. When I got to go to, and meet you back in early April, I think it was the first week of April, you had just received some sort of fairly amazing news about the old Sims Hospital. Would you be willing to share with our listeners what is happening, speaking of space for healing?
Absolutely. The space where Anarcha Lucy Betsy and those other, 9, 10, 11, 8 women were tortured, we now own the space.
Wow.
I own it. And it just the way that it happened is, I say it was God's favor. It was just orchestrated so beautifully, for this gentleman who is deeply religious, deeply from the old South, to the point where I thought that he was, I was a little fearful of what he was going to think, but he was like, we don't want this space anymore. There's a spirit in it. There's paranormal activity. There's something that's just not
disordered.
Right. Yes. And he said, we don't want it. And I said, well, I want it. And he said, what would you do with it? I said, I'll teach every woman, man, child that I know the rest of this story. And so be it.
So be it.
Yes. And so we closed on the space February 15th.
Wow.
It's literally right around the corner from the slave auction block in downtown Montgomery, Alabama, right on a very popular street leading into our city. And so we find ourselves to be very blessed, but also burdened.
Yeah.
With, the charge.
It's a high charge.
Absolutely. To make sure that we not only change the narrative, but it's used as a space for healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
For anyone who wants it. It's a space for healing and redemption and reckoning, in a space that was once used to torture and mangle, traffic, in prison. It is now a space for freedom.
It's so gorgeous, Michelle. When you took us there, and I think it was so fresh, the news that you now owned it.
Yeah.
And I remember our group kind of just found ourselves moved to sing.
All I have needed, thy hand
has provided. It was great as thy faithfulness.
Yes.
And I felt this deep well that I have not felt in a long time, of tears after tears after tears of just the beauty of what you now get to steward. It was powerful. It felt like a blessing. I hope it was a blessing somehow of the space that it is now under new authority.
Yes. It was a cleansing. You all cleansed it through something. And every time I listen to that, the tape or the audio, I cry because it was such a presence. You remember that?
I do. I was standing right next to you. I remember it vividly. It was one of those life markers. It's rare, I think, that we get to see such specific, concrete movement that feels redemptive. And of course, it's just the beginning of a new journey and a new adventure. I'm sure there will be new complexities, but something so vividly dark to be transferred in hands and ownership you just rarely see that. It's given me new hope for reparations.
It was beautiful.
So you invoked Martin Luther King Jr., and I don't want to overly idolize him, but I do. Part of the trip for me was reading more of him than I had read in a while going from place to place to place throughout Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama. And I'm going to read aloud here, just in very brief summarized form, the principles of nonviolence that he gleaned partly from Gandhi and a bunch of other sources, folks at Union Theological Seminary, and then watching movements around the world and history. And as I was marinating on this pilgrimage, I met you and I was like, she embodies this, but this is so hard to do. So I'm going to read these principles out loud in very brief form and then ask you to just reflect on them a bit. Do they resonate, and what have been the challenges of living into them? So here they are. It is not a method for cowards. It does resist. It is active, nonviolent resistance to evil. Number 2, nonviolent resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. Number 3, the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who happen to be doing the evil. It is evil that the nonviolent resistor seeks to defeat, not the persons victimized by evil. Number 4, a willingness to accept suffering without retaliation, to accept blows from the opponent without striking back. The nonviolent resistor is willing to accept violence if necessary, but never to inflict it. If going to jail is necessary, he enters it, quote, as a bridegroom enters the bride's chamber. Number 5, it avoids not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of spirit. The nonviolent resistor not only refuses to shoot his opponent, but he also refuses to hate him. At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. And then the final thing, which I find really profound actually, is number 6, nonviolent resistance is based on the conviction that the universe is on the side of justice. Consequently, the believer in nonviolence has deep faith in the future. This faith is another reason why the nonviolent resistor can accept suffering without retaliation, for he knows that in his struggle for justice, he has cosmic companionship. Michelle, how do these resonate with you as you think about your work? What are the challenges in living into these principles, and where do you find grace in them when you feel like you fail?
Oh, this is such a hard question. Because, when I studied the nonviolence movement, I understand the concept. I understand where Gandhi was trying to go with this, along with King, because, if you resist, people were murdered and killed, but they were murdered and killed anyway. And so just seeing how the reaction to nonviolence, I do believe that there are spiritual forces that are causing people to act and do these atrocities against people. Definitely a spiritual thing. But I struggle sometimes with the nonviolent aspect of it, because yes, this whole journey of civil rights was a prayer walk. It was a faith walk. It was definitely leaning on the everlasting arm, right, for guidance and for protection. But at the end of the day, when we see what it has done to the legacy and where we are today, we will actually stand and watch men with their foot on the neck of a Black, harmless individual, because we've been conditioned to do that through the spirit of nonviolence and to stay alive. I believe, if I can speak spiritually and as a believer, that Jesus himself was proactive.
Mm-hmm.
He turned over the tables because he was grieved at what he saw. And I think that even Dr. King said towards the end of his life, I think I may have sent my people into a burning building because of this, 10 years of nonviolence, and the violence persisted against Black people. I struggle. Can I be honest?
Yeah, of course.
I struggle. You slap me, I'm gonna slap you back. And sometimes that would have a person to back down. Okay, maybe they're not, the Black Panther movement was about feeding people, was about taking care of community. But the attitude and the disposition of a Black Panther is that when they're backed into a corner, they're harmless animals, but when you back them into the corner, they have to come out to protect themselves. And so with that, I struggle. I struggle, but I do understand it, like, with a lot of the protests, how they had to look a certain way. You talk about being humanized. They had to dress in their Sunday's best so that people would not see them as derelicts or, just folks that were poor, or there was a certain way they had to do things, and I get it. I was in a position, if I could share this story with you, I was driving to Atlanta, Georgia, and it was at 3:00 in the morning, and my spirit said, pull over, you're tired. And I was like, no, I can get there. Little did I know there was an officer behind me, and he pulled me over, and I'm like, why is he stopping me, right? Was I swerving? Was I driving too fast? He pulled me over and said, you don't have a tag on your car. And I said, sir, I have a tag on my car. What are you talking about? And I just didn't even think anything of it. He was like, license and registration. I gave him that. 45 minutes later, he tells me to get out of the car.
Oh,
He's like,
Michelle.
we're going to take your car. It is 3:45. I'm headed to catch a flight. We talk about humanity and humanizing the condition. But you kind of triggered me with the whole nonviolence, right? I'm torn, but now I see where it works for some, because that night, that officer and the 5 others were going to kill me in Noonan, Georgia, which is known for racism, which is stopping people. I went through there the other night. I try not to even drive through there anymore. And they had someone on the ground. And long story short, I was traumatized. I still am. This just happened maybe about 4 months ago.
Oh, my goodness.
They towed my car. But the only thing I could say was, with a smile, I said, "Sir, what you're trying to do tonight is not going to happen. I am getting on that plane in the morning." There's a long list of things that happened, but I'm here to talk to you today because of that nonviolence.
Wow, Michelle.
Don't raise your voice. Keep a smile. But I told him, I said, "I'm going to pray for you and your family, because my heart is to do good in the world," right? And I said, "So I'm going to pray for you." And I said, "I understand what King said at this moment. We're all right." When they bombed his house, he's like, "We're all right. Calm down." I understood it then. So even in my struggle, I was able to stay alive at 3:45 in the morning in Noonan, Georgia, on the side of the road. They towed my car. So I hope I answered the question. I still struggle, but I see where it's about living to tell the story and not becoming a hashtag.
Thank you. I have no words. I have many, many depths turning right now. Thank you for sharing that. That is traumatizing. There's no.
It is, yeah, absolutely. In 2022.
Yeah, and very meta for you. I mean, given what you do for a living.
Right. But you know what? There's so many beautiful things that happen out of that. I was sharing my story when I was so traumatized. I started stuttering. It was just that bad.
I don't blame you.
Like, I knew this guy was going to kill me. And a week later, I'm telling my story here at the Mothers, and I broke down and I wept. And a lady said, "You don't have to pay for your tow. I'm going to pay for your tickets." It came up to $3,000. Where they had my car was in Timbuktu somewhere. I couldn't even find it. It took me 3 hours to find my car. And it took me 3 weeks to go find it. And it was near $3,000 along with the ticket. This woman was so moved and touched. She's like, "We're going to pay your tickets. We're going to pay your tow." And it was just, so in the midst of it all,
yeah,
I can still say.
You can see the beauty elsewhere, and
yes,
the love and the shared humanity that emerges. Yeah. Yeah. We do know evil, we do share that. I think we know it when we see it.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually much better in shared physical space of being present to one another than on Twitter.
Absolutely.
Well, that is a very poignant and very real way. Thanks for your honesty. To bridge to my final question, which is, how do you sustain yourself in this work as an artist, the midwife of changing hearts and sight? What are the friendships? What are the rituals? What are your reservoirs?
I didn't really think that I needed one until COVID. I didn't understand why I was coming home depleted, right? Just drained. It takes a lot of energy. And I'm one that I like to share stories with a little bit of humor, just to take the edge off a little. But my reservoir would be my family, my parents, who are deeply spiritual. We're not religious, but we're spiritual. And the prayers that they pray for me, my sister, like my covering would be my family. Because sometimes I can't pray for myself. It's like you just can't. It gets so hard. But when you have a community of people that surround you, and then my art, I'm starting to make more art, and I've cut back on doing so many tours. For the most part, I just try to do what I love so that I can die empty. which is trying to fill the vision that's given to me so that I can make sure that my time here on this earth is well spent and that I've done due diligence. And I will say to you that what my motto that I live by, and I've heard people say, don't use that. I don't like the way that sounds. Well, it's about creative extremism. When Dr. King was in this Birmingham jail, and it was the white moderates who told him that this is just crazy what you're doing. They didn't believe in the cause, and why do you have to get arrested, and why are you doing all of these things? And he just went on to say, was not Jesus an extremist? They called him an extremist. They called Dr. King an extremist. And at first he was upset and he grappled with it, but then he said, wait a minute, Thomas Jefferson was an extremist. We hold these things to be self-evident, was not Abraham Lincoln. And he goes down the line. He said, Jesus was an extremist. Love those who hate you. Do good to those who despitefully use you. That's extreme. And so at the end of that comment, he says, what the world, what the nation, and what the South needs more of are creative extremists.
I love
that.
To
walk in the Montgomery was extreme just to be seen as human. That's extreme. And so for me, I stand on that. And so I will continue to create art that pushes that envelope of creative extremism so that people can know the truth. Because once we know the truth, we're free.
I love it, Michelle. What a gift you are and an inspiration. Thank you very much for this and for sharing as honestly and transparently as you have. I'm so glad you're alive as of 4 months ago. I can't tell you. Oh, thank goodness. Thanks for listening to the Whole Person Revolution podcast, which is as much a cultural compass for comment as it is an incarnate witness of the hope we explore in our pages. Like what you heard? Check out this podcast's intellectual seedbed at www.comment.org, where you'll find an artistic rendering of essays that shed light on the very real shadows afflicting the peace of our commons today, but also the many cracks of light. And consider joining us. You can write, you can read, you can host a comment supper in your neighborhood, or you can suggest questions that are pressing upon your desire to be an agent of grace and truth and gentleness and trustworthiness. We want to hear from you, and we need to learn from you. Write to us at comment@cardis.ca and expect a sincere exchange. We're honored to have you within our orbit and to pilgrim together toward wholeness in a world splintering against it. The Whole Person Revolution is hosted by Comment Magazine, produced and with original music by Ali Crummy, audience strategy by Matt Crummy. I'm Ann Snyder, and I'll see you next week.